Hi, good sis Mari and friends. Welcome back to Got Melanin. We are on our 12th episode, I believe. And still growing, still going. And what an episode, because the last time we saw each other, which was also in real life, so that was extra exciting. But the last time we saw each other, we were sitting on your couch, biting our nails until like there was nothing left, talking about if he gets reelected, what do we do? If he gets reelected, what do we do? And guess what? It didn't happen because he didn't get reelected. So it's a great, great, great time to be having this podcast today because, yeah, there's a lot to not necessarily unpack, but definitely a lot to discuss. And obviously that's why we brought back our good friend, good sis, WCAP's fellow person, Neda. And this is why we have a new face in the space, Sahara. So hi everyone, and yay, Trump's out of office. Whoa! Very excited.
Oh my goodness me. Your excitement is so amazing because I did the last week with you via text message and we didn't sound like that last week, sis. No. That was not the mood. I was texting all of you. That was not the mood in the squad. But it is so nice to be back, to be sharing the space with you guys. I'm gonna do it. I'm starting the show the same way we always do. I don't care if we just got a new president-elect and VP-elect. We are still looking for justice for Breonna Taylor. It's still a movement. We may have got a president. We didn't get a savior. We got a starting point. If you missed that point, run it back. Yeah. But no, honestly, I have to start this the same way and say, how is everyone? I have been heart palpitations for the past, week or so. But, I am feeling a lot better now. I'm real proud to be walking around as a Black woman. You can't tell me anything at this moment. But I'm intrigued to hear what our good guests are feeling and where are we going from here?
Yeah. That's a good question. I definitely feel better than I did all last week. I was like frantically checking Twitter and MSNBC every second I could, which is just like not a good recipe for your mental health. So like I was not doing well last week. Obviously I feel better now. Like it does not compare to last week, but I think like the biggest pain point for me last week was after election day and just seeing that, 60 million Americans still voted for this man, that it was so close that I was literally watching a man count the votes in Nevada. Video footage of him. Like I was like, come on, guy, you got it. Like it shouldn't have come down to that. Like I shouldn't have been doing that. It should have been a lot less close. And so I think like that is what still sits really heavy with me, even though, like, thank God we're not getting another 4 years of Trump. But like that is still weighing pretty heavily on me.
Yeah. Neda, you worked pretty closely. Perhaps not necessarily like, I don't know. I don't want to say words that you have to be like, Melina, actually, no. But yeah, you worked pretty closely with the Biden-Harris campaign, essentially. How was that? How was last week? Because did you sleep at all? Like,
I actually did not watch like the campaign election. I didn't watch the election on election day because I just knew that if I opened that can of worms, that it would just be ongoing. But I watched it the next day and for the rest of the week. So I don't know how much I did myself. Really, I mean, I went to bed at a reasonable hour on election day, but beyond that, I mean, I don't think I slept the rest of the week.
Yeah.
So I did my best. But yeah, it was definitely, I felt the same way. I relate a lot, Sahara. I was really concerned at the closeness of it. I think that still hasn't really left me yet. Especially because in some places, like today on CNN, I'm watching them still counting votes. And even though, it's been called and we know that the margins are very small and there's likely to be no legal standing to challenge it or to provide a recount, it shouldn't have been this close. I echo that remark. I definitely relate. It should not have been this close.
Yeah. I saw a,
Go.
Oh, sorry, Mari. Go for it.
You sure?
Yeah. Actually, wait, hold on. Yeah, I got something to say. Reclaiming my time. But essentially, like, I just saw this video today as like throughout whatever Instagram, and it was this like middle-aged white guy that was basically trying to explain like to other white people like why Trump for 4 years was not that beneficial realistically to like the cultural and the social space in the US. And he was like, okay, it's not necessarily that like lists all the misogynistic, racist, xenophobic things that he's said and done, but he was like, it's actually even worse that he's normalized it. And so I feel like what we saw, the reason why it was so close was because for half of, I guess, Americans, it was actually just the new normal that is going to just keep going. And like, such is the US now. And I'm very happy with it. And I'd rather keep it that way. And like, you guys are all entirely right. Like, that's what's the scariest. That's the scariest part in all of that, is that basically 1 in 2 Americans was like, oh yeah, bet this is not that deep. We can survive another 4 years. And it's like, no, some people have literally like, no, you can't, you know what I mean? But yeah,
I actually watched the video. I know the one you're talking about where he's like sitting in a car kind of, it's in black and white. And like, it's not even that he denies climate change. It's not that
it's not even that.
It's not that he incarcerates Black and brown people at mass like numbers. And he just goes through this whole list of things.
Massive list.
It's just that he's made it acceptable.
Yeah.
He's normalized it. Like,
yeah.
Like he's normalized it. I watched that video and I was like, yeah, because there's now a generation of children who have watched this on the news, who have watched this on television, who watch their parents repeat these things, and who are going to grow up that like this is how it should have been. And I think there's going to be like a bit of resentment. There's definitely resentment.
I don't know if I'm cynical, but I just feel like it's not like, I feel like these people have always been here, right?
Yeah.
And so when people are like, he just normalized it, I don't know if it normalized is the word I would use. I think what I would say is that he gave it a national stage and he made it okay.
He mainstreamed it.
He mainstreamed it, right? And he allowed people who have always had, you know, pick your bad cause here, who have always had one or multiple of those feelings, you know, that was an issue that they thought was important. Like, they felt that it was okay, and this was their guide to vote for. So normalized isn't the word I would use, but I think he's given it a mainstream platform.
If we're gonna be frank, he did exactly what, ask any Make America Great person, please tell me, what is the time period in which you are referencing in which America was great? Right. I don't know, when Johnny and Susie played on scooters in the suburbs, is apparently it was great. But I know that Tyrone was still in the hood and life still was not cool. Yeah. And so this reference to normalizing this ideology, he's literally referencing most of the time, like the 50s, 60s, when we were lynching Negroes in trees, right? And that was okay. And people was cool with being, I'm in the Klan. Yeah, you may have been wearing a hood, but you were still my doctor. You were still my dentist, and we still knew you from those moments. And so I think all he did, I agree with Sahara, really what you did was you mainstreamed that rhetoric, that very specific talking points, the ways in which closeted racism had been pushed to the margins into selective groups. You took it back out the closet and you said, here you go. We're just going to use this. And then we're going to make it a global rhetoric. So to Neda's point, I think those kids were going to grow up with that rhetoric either way. The fact that USA Today could literally tweet, I don't know, sub 48 hours after Kamala's speech and say, what did she say? Women, they quoted and said, women are the backbone of society. My good sis said, Black women who are often oppressed and not seen are the backbone of society. And you took out the Black. You literally, she said, we're not seen. And you said, we don't see you.
I mean, I've been having those questions. Same with the youth vote. Like, everyone is talking about the youth vote. 51% of white Gen Zers voted for Trump. So like, let's So like we have to just take a deeper look at this, and I'm curious to what you all have been thinking, because like even in Joe Biden's speeches and talking about just like the Democratic Party kind of pushing for the moderate vote, like their whole tagline has been like this return to decency, and this return to decency is the phrase they use.
Build
like
back better.
No doubt Joe Biden is more decent, but like let's also like I don't like that's not what I'm trying to say, but I think like what does that also mean, right? And so all this kind of returning back language, I'm like I don't want to return back, I want to move forward. So I just have a problem with all of the major parties and major systems talking about a return to anything, because you know, for Black and brown people, we don't want to return anywhere.
Yeah.
We were saying I can't breathe like with Eric Garner when Obama was president. You know, we were marching for Trayvon Martin in 2014. We were doing all of these things even before then. So like, yeah, I do see your point. I saw, it was funny, I was talking to one of my mentees actually yesterday, and he's a Gen Zer, and he sent me a tweet that was like, at least now we can return to normal racism. And I was like, no, what a concept. Like the normal levels of racism that we've grown accustomed to. And I was just like, so awful.
It's like that. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I was like, but then also like, yeah, we definitely don't want to return. We do want to move forward. I also agree with that.
Yeah.
When he sent me,
it does, like, it's like all of these conversations that I think we've been having with, whether it's within our community or if it's with people outside of it, when it's kind of like not, you know, oh, I mean, he did this, which, or like she did this, which like, it's a little racist, but like, it's like, you're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. You're either racist or you're not racist. Like there's no little bit of like whatsoever, blah, blah, blah. Like that's just how it is. You either have it or you don't. And so it's one of those where it's like, if you recognize it and it's like, okay, I'm going to move forward from this, then calm. That's, yes, you recognize that, but you've left that behind and you're moving forward. But it is just, yeah, we can't, I don't want to even go back to a normal level of racism. Like, I'd rather just move forward, you know, from all of that, because that was pain.
But that's the whole point around, and you knew we were going to get here eventually. So if you're listening and you're like, oh, they've hit it, they're there, we're here now. That's my whole point about why we tried to stake all of our energy into getting middle-class white women to carry the Democratic vote. That's my real question. 55%, so we saw an increase of white women voted for Donald Trump. I'm letting that simmer because I want people to hear that fact. I really want you to reap the sound of me saying it to you. And we went through an entire summer where we saw lots of Black squares. We had books fly off the shelves. Everybody and their mother was an ally. And I'm saying maybe those are the 45% of white women that voted for Joe Biden. Maybe that genuinely, maybe that is who that is. But this other 55%, where we staked our energy, where we said, we're going to put it here. Please, somebody explain to me why we did that, when in fact, the Democratic Party is built on the back of people of color, Black people specifically. But I'm also going to give credit to, as Neda pointed out, people in Erie, Pennsylvania who are Arab, because I know she phone banked there, and in Detroit, and all of these other groups, and you know, all of the Native Americans in Arizona. I'm going to give them their credit as well.
Yeah.
But we've got people like Bernie Sanders talking about we should only be peddling to the working class, and then forget that there are Black people and people of color who are working class, and we should also be driving our rhetoric towards them.
Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about, I feel like a lot of people were calling out like progressive people who were running for Senate, people running for the House. And if you think about the more progressive things that were like different propositions in California or New Jersey, like Florida voted for Trump, but they also passed $15 minimum wage.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's like this, it's like the party is just off in terms of where they think people are. And I also think like socialism is a bad word in this country, but like everyone wants $15 minimum wage and we all want healthcare. And I'm like, well, that's kind of what that is. So I think like the way our party communicates, and even like picking Joe Biden, right? We had 50 people to pick from and he's the one that we picked.
Yeah.
So that is like a real like crux and struggle for me, is just like our actual politics, right? It's like now that Trump is gone and we like don't have to deal with his nonsense anymore, like let's get back to some of these actual policies and like discussing what would be better for all Americans, working class, which I don't know why they think Black and brown people aren't working class, Mari, to your point. Like I work, I
earn a wage. I should be talked about in this conversation.
That's right. So I totally hear you. And the other thing I wanted to say for what you said of like the Black squares and the books, because I often think about my like social media bubble and, you know, a lot of the white best friends that I have. And it's like, I know actually where they stand and like they're the 45%. Yeah. That 45 knows that 55.
Yep.
So, like, it's not on me. It is on that 45 to tell their Aunt Karen and everyone else. And like that.
For like, that matter, shoot, tell your friends Becky for that point.
Facts.
I love that you said that though, Sahara. I think that's like a really important point. Like that 45 knows that 55, right? Like it's not on you. It's not on me either. Like it's that 45% knows that 55%. So where after this summer of allyship, I like where did you go? Like this whole summer of allyship, like where did you go?
Well, I mean, you know, it's fall, so everybody had to go to the pumpkin patches and go and pick up. Like, I mean, times have changed, dear. It's no longer summer of activism. Now it's fall and like cuffing season and like cute times. Because realistically, like that's what it is. I don't even mean it as a dig. Like, do you know what I mean? I'm not even trying to be shady.
Your activism was seasonal. Yeah.
I'm not even trying to be shady. Like, it's just what it is. Even, do you know what I mean? Like, and especially because so we had like basically 3 months of lockdown where everyone's at home, got to do their own stuff, blah, blah, blah. You have the death of an unarmed Black man by like strangulation, essentially, of the knee. Like that takes place and is posted all over social media. That's right before summer. Same thing. Like, who doesn't love a protest in the summer? Like, to be honest, it is a nice vibe, especially when you're there championing human rights, because you're technically on the right side of history, but it is what it is. And then, like school starts again and like lockdowns are like lifted and people are going back to work and restaurants are opening and bars are opening and people's lives go back to normal. And it's exactly what you keep saying, Mari, in every episode of Got Melanin, is that like, it's nice that you get to go back to some other reality, that this isn't at the forefront of your mind, but like, that's not the case for us. And I genuinely think that it was just a summer of activism. Like, and again, it's not even any digs. You do what you want in it. Like, you've got free will. It's up to you. But there's no point in like turning around if in, 2 months or 3 months, there's another death of an unarmed Black man. And now you're all of a sudden back at it because like now it's winter and you're also stuck at home and you're just like on your phone. Do you know what I mean? It's like either you actually like champion this for real, and use that space. I've seen so many of my white friends that like have a platform that have continued to use it. And like, I am so thankful for that. But I've seen also others there, it's like kind of gone back to very normal, and that's fine because that's your normal. But there has to be a realization that like, oh, you're still talking about BLM? Yeah, because it doesn't actually end, because it is, Black lives, like we're here, we're living them.
You mean Black lives still matter? It's not summer anymore?
It's a shock. I know. Really take a moment to process and digest that. It's
been 210 days since the murder of Breonna Taylor. Still.
Yeah.
Still 210 days. And it's still just the wall that's getting justice in it. It's fine.
It's like the whole point to us honestly opening this Pandora's box of the 45 that knows the 55 is when we think about this election and we think about where the Democratic Party's bread was buttered. It was done by grassroots organizers in communities that were organizing long before this election happened.
Facts.
When I think about people like Stacey Abrams, who lost an election,
Queen, Stacey.
Sis did not go back and say, let me hide. Sis said, let me end voter suppression in Georgia. She said, it's time to get to work. And I think there is a conversation that we all can have as women of color about this unsung work that is continually done. Because Neda, you hit it, right? BLM started with the death of Trayvon Martin in 2012. That is when the organization is founded. We have been doing this work for almost a decade, and you just got hip to the party.
Yeah.
So what do we say about all of those women and men? Because I am wearing a shirt right now that you guys can't see that says "My Block, My Hood, My City." Shout out to Jamal Cole and all of the grassroots organizing in Chicago. You work. But like those people have been doing this work for a long time. Where do we see them fitting into the party? What do we see their role was in this election now that people are finally talking about it?
I should say I'm here in this podcast in a personal capacity, but during the course of the campaign, I volunteered as a director on the Arab American engagement team, which was part of the grassroots organizing effort. And for me, as like an Arab American in this space, and as one of the few Arab Americans in this space, to be honest, it's allowed me to have a platform within my community to push us forward. So this is the first presidential campaign ever to ever have an Arab American team. This is also the first presidential campaign ever to release an Arab American platform policy agenda. We have never been on a ticket before. For me, this election, it was really, really important to have grassroots organizers. The informal networks I've built is the only reason that I was encouraged to be on this campaign, was because I've been able to navigate this space from a young age through my informal community activism and organizing work from, I feel like, the time I was born until now, because since I was little, I was like, why am I in other box? Why don't I have a box? Why aren't I recognized?
Yeah.
Mom, why don't I exist? So yeah, doing this work for my whole life, it was really important to have a community activism space for communities like mine, which are new to this work. It's very different in the Black community, obviously, which has intentionally been suppressed from the last 400 years. And there's a lot of like, not just work to be done in the defensive, but like to affirmatively like dismantle the things that are going on. I think for my community, we have parts of that, but it's a little easier because our systems aren't structured to be anti-Arab versus like they're structured to be focused towards Black people, and we get caught in a contingency, unfortunately. But for our community, at least, having those informal networks is how everything was done. Like our networking, like through WhatsApp, through Facebook, through Twitter, through like email chains, through just like, because like Arabs all know each other in this country because there are not many of us, just like being able to make connections. This was also the first time they had an Arab American line for like making calls. Like I called people in Arabic, offering like Arabic translations for things. They had printed materials in Arabic to give to people in our community. Like things like that have never happened for us. So for me, this was really important. And I told you in Erie, Pennsylvania, shout out to Gary out there. And because he is like this old man that I met through one of our community organizing things. He's like an OG organizer. He's been there for decades doing this work. He is about this life. And he literally like just gathered all of these first gen kids from Cameroon and Haiti and around the Middle East and around every continent and country in Erie and said, here's a list of new Americans. Go out and explain voting to them and in their language. Yeah. And he himself like translated materials and trained these kids, and he paid every one of them for every minute of work. He would not let any of these kids do unpaid work on top. He was like, we learn value here, and value works two ways.
I think like you can't deny the importance of grassroots work and knocking on doors and phone banking and all the other new virtual things that were done during this time of COVID. I think that's so important, and should continue, because the way you have to, we could have a whole separate podcast about how I feel about the thoughts on that we even have to register to vote. Why do I have to register? If I'm a citizen and I turn 18, I should just be able to go to vote. I don't even understand what are these deadlines. It's different everywhere. That alone is a barrier to getting people to vote. So that is the grassroots part of it all. And those people on the ground is so important. But I also want those organizers to have a seat at the White House table, to have a seat on a task force. I mean, Joe Biden is saying that systemic racism is, one of his in his top 5 of topics that he wants to tackle within his first 100 days. But Joe can't do that as Joe. He needs to bring people to the table. And it's who are the people that he's bringing to the table? And I hope that, community people, educators, young people, I hope those are the people that actually get to, create our party platform like we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Not that I want them gone from the great work that they're doing on the ground, because I find so much value in that, but it's those voices are often the voices that are missing when it comes to creating platforms and policy. And so bridging that gap is something that I would really like to see in terms of moving us forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you on how even this voting system works, because I nearly was gonna rip someone's head off last week. So I registered back when I was living in Florida, in Miami. So I'm Miami-Dade County, everything's fine. And I sent in a thing to get my ballot, months ago. And then I was it got to be October and I was nothing's arrived yet. This is okay. It is what it is. And finally got my ballot. I was yes, okay, cool. I got it by email. The thing said I could fax it, right? So I was okay, instead of relying on, not saying the postal service is not something to rely on, but instead of relying on the thing of a letter actually passing through people's hands, I was I'm gonna fax it. It's 1998. It doesn't matter. I'm gonna fax it. It's cool. And I find the one fax machine in Manchester, which, by the way, if you're listening and you're from this hood, it's at Ryman's in Arndale. You're welcome. And I said, do my ballot, blah, 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 vote, etc. Send it. I'm yes, cool. Everything's cool, done, blah, blah, blah. This is Monday, okay? So I'm Monday at noon. So I'm they have so much time until, right, okay. Tuesday night at 8:45 p.m. here, I get an email that I need to send in an affidavit because there was a signature discrepancy with my ballot. And many things go through my head at that point. One, just plain and simple. And then mostly I was just hang on a minute. How are you going to send someone a ballot and then have them send something else later to confirm that it's them? Why did you send me the ballot in the first place? Was I not vetted enough at that point?
Or why didn't you send an affidavit request with the ballot?
God forbid.
Why did you find that out after?
But see what I'm saying? So I was just there okay, am I experiencing voter suppression at the moment? Perhaps.
Yes.
I was
yes, literally, yes. The answer is yes.
So, okay, thank you, choir, thank you. But I was just this is absolutely ridiculous. So because I got the email on Tuesday night, I was I mean, Florida already done turned red. So at this point, what am I, is my, not that is my vote going to do anything? Obviously I send out the affidavit and stuff Wednesday morning. It must have been 4 a.m. in Miami. So I know they got that when they opened up their offices the next morning. And then, Wednesday night or Thursday morning, I can't remember, but I get an email saying, oh, thank you for your affidavit. We'll now send it over for the review. You out here count this is ridiculous. Yeah, no, they fully told me oh yeah, this will go through our review, blah, blah, blah. And again, I'm so why send out ballots? Do you know what I mean? Was I and it just really, oh my God, I wanted to scream. And then I know Florida, they were gonna vote Trump. Like there was no other way around it. It is what it is. At least they raised minimum wage, which is frankly a shock, but it is what it is. I wasn't surprised that obviously they went Trump, but in a very real, like, do you know what I mean? If I was voting, for instance, Pennsylvania, where it came down to like tens of thousands of votes, like that could have been something insanely important. And even just in general, I am an American citizen by birth, okay? Just because I don't live in the US, just because I don't, doesn't mean that I don't have the right to vote for the country that like I hold a passport for and nationality for. Do I say I'm American? No, but I obviously have been very clearly influenced by American culture, you know? And so it does kind of like, yeah, it really pissed me off. Like, I'm not gonna lie. And
it piss you off because that's like, it just shouldn't be this hard. I mean, like I live on the Upper West Side, like it is not a disenfranchised community where I live, and I waited 2.5 hours to vote.
damn.
I voted early.
Yeah.
So like, the whole time I stood in line, I was like, if this is happening here, I don't know what's happening in Harlem. I don't know what's happening in Brooklyn, because this is insane. And even when I got there, I switched my registration from my parents' home in the suburbs to my apartment. And like, before I left the house, I was like, you know what? Let me just bring this letter confirming. They didn't tell me to bring the letter. I said, let me just bring this. Sure enough, as soon as I show up, the woman's like, do you have your card? And I was like, no, I'm technically a new voter, so I didn't get a card. And she was like, oh, do you have the form? And I was like, yep. But no one told me to bring that form. So I would have waited 2.5 hours in that line.
Yeah.
Then when I got there, if I didn't have that form, I wouldn't have been able to vote.
Yeah.
But it's like, and these are genuinely not basic, but these are like relatively mundane issues of voter suppression. These are very like privileged issues of voter suppression, for a lack of a better word. These are very privileged voter suppression issues. When we think about the large scale voter suppression in places like Mississippi and Louisiana and Georgia, and the reoccurring system, which we've talked about on this show so many times, of the prison pipeline, and people being so unaware of their ability to vote, right? The lack of continuity at the federal and state level about if you are a felon, if you are an ex-con, if you are in jail, if you are on parole, all of these things, the lack of continuity between states about what is allowed for you as a voter is absolutely egregious. The fact that, you know, people, and even on a basic level, on a low income status, people that do not know, how do you shut down? I'll go back to Kentucky when they were in the primary for their Senate race, and they went from 2,000 polling places in Louisville to 200, and you took the most of them out of the Black community. That was by design.
Yeah, it's not
and
random.
That in itself is, I think, what makes people like Stacey Abrams and Tamika D. Mallory and all of these other people who have been doing the grassroots organizing, as Neda mentioned, like so much more iconic, because you went up against things that have been in place for 400 plus years, right? The Obama administration did hardcore grassroots organizing. Me drove to Gary with my mom, knocked on doors in Gary, Indiana, every weekend for weeks, where people were 80 years old and never had figured out how to vote because nobody had ever come to their house. It was like, oh, you can register to vote.
Yeah.
This is generational trauma. Yeah. And yet we still were able to somehow surpass it and in this election. But we have a larger conversation that needs to be had policy-wise about these disenfranchised communities and how we re-enter them into society in a meaningful way, because this allowance of them living on the margins, whether you be Black or brown, is incredibly problematic. And we as the Big Tent party should no longer be standing for this marginalization.
I mean, there's so many things, like even, you know, having it in the right language, as Neda said, like that is just critical. That is important. I mean, I even think about, we were talking about Florida and like how they kept saying like Trump didn't get the Latina vote. And I was like, can we please break that down? Like,
no, he did.
He get?
Stop.
Who didn't he get? Like, like there's so much nuance in everything, and it's just like these big blanket statements, and like not just like understanding the nuance of these different communities is like a real issue. And like who turned up to vote was not white moderate people. Who we got out to vote was communities of color, was immigrant communities. Like that's who voted. And there are so many more of them that still aren't registered. At work, I work for an organization that works with young people, and we did like a text line that day. And we've been working on this since 2018, and still kids are texting me like, if I'm in LA, but I'm registered in San Francisco, like, can I still vote? And I'm like, no, girl, you can't. And so it's like, we can't stop the messaging. We can't stop the grassroots organizing. We can't leave out any group. And I just really wish our party was better at that, because it's just like, there are people that can do the work. You're just not giving them the resources to do it.
You know, it makes me laugh because like 4 years ago, this wave of people came out from nowhere and cast votes. And that's, I mean, low key how Trump was elected in the first place. And now it's like this new wave of people that came out of nowhere, but not nowhere, came out from very established places and within the country, and finally like also had their voices heard and also kind of like made that happen. And I think, you know, in this is literally all coming to me now, but like even when, because my favorite pastime yesterday was just going on like the Trump family Twitters and Instagrams and stuff and just kind of seeing what's wagwan. And essentially like, I mean, everyone's in full denial, number one, but it's expected. And then secondly, there's this line that they keep saying of like, count all the legal votes, that's fine, count all of them, but don't count the illegal votes. And at first I was like, oh, illegal because it's in the mail, yeah, ridiculous. But now I'm like, oh, wait a minute. It's a lot of Black and brown people that came out to vote in it. I don't want to say that he's saying that they're all illegals and thus their votes don't count. However, he has referred to the same like demographic as illegal immigrants and as people who are illegals, even though, as we said with Neda in numerous episodes on this podcast, that's not a thing. And thus that, yeah, so it just kind of like, do you know what I mean? It literally is like, as you guys have just been saying, like, it's a question of language and rhetoric and like what is put forward and what all of that ends up conveying to the person that's on the other end and listening to all of that. But yeah, sorry, it all just sparks a lot in my mind.
I also just need to say that the whole Trump family voted by mail. So like they can just stop with that. They posted a photo of them with their ballots. I'm like, hello? You voted by mail.
Hypocrisy is a real thing.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm from the state of Ohio, and like our Secretary of State had proposed that they only reduce the ballot drop-offs to 1 box per county. And we had to go through like a series of 3, like there was like a bunch of litigation that was happening in Ohio over this because they were trying to remove all the ballot boxes, like the drop-offs from every county except for 1 per county. Yeah. But like, it's still something being discussed. Like my county went red and my local politics flipped like 3 Democratic seats to red, which was also alarming.
What could this be from? Because we know, but like, you know, especially because if it's your county and stuff, like, what do you think happened that 3 seats flipped like that?
I talked to my parents about this a lot, and I talked to a lot of people in our family and around town, just because it's weird to me. Like, I live in a community that has so many people of color, that's so diverse, that has so many different immigrant communities. There's lots of like Greek, Arab, like Italian, like first generation people who live in my community, in addition to like people who are like people of color, Black people who already lived in my community. So it's like a very diverse community. And I'm still struggling to understand why it went red, because I can't imagine all these people just woke up and decided to vote against their own interests. And it like makes me just question, I don't know, access to information, access to news, things that are being spread. It makes me wonder, like, I was talking to someone from back home recently who was, you know, trying to argue COVID with me, and I was like, no, COVID exists. And I just kind of stopped there. I was like, this isn't a debate. It definitely exists. And I just think about things like that, and I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I come from a small town, right? Like 70,000 people live in my hometown. So I know that there is some divide they're saying now of like urban versus rural vote. I wouldn't call my district urban, or rural, but I mean, it's still small town Ohio.
Yeah.
It's surrounded by a lot of rural space, but I don't know if that's necessarily impacts it the same way. It just, I feel like, I don't know. But yeah, my local politics was really sad this year for us.
I don't think you're alone, Neda, honestly. Like when we're looking at, I had a conversation yesterday with some people in my family, and one of the things that somebody brought up was exactly what you just mentioned, that a messaging and access to quality information, right? So if you are in, we're going to use small town Ohio, not necessarily your town, but we'll say small town Ohio. But if you're in small town Ohio and all you're doing is receiving messaging from mainstream media, specifically, let's just say you're only paying attention to Fox and maybe if you're lucky, NBC. And and you yourself had never really thought about some of the issues that were the hot button issues of this election, right? So if you thought everything was okay, and then all you saw was one Black person be killed in the street, I'm going to do this because it stresses me out. And all you saw was one Black person get shot in the street. And then you saw the whole country erupt into looting and rioting, and you were still sitting there in small town Ohio, and you didn't know anything about all these years of suppression and oppression because you received a education with textbooks that never told you about anything. You were not around communities of color that were educated in their own oppression and the way that the anti-Blackness narrative was being put upon them. You're not around people who have access to quality healthcare information. So all you're seeing is the daily COVID briefings. And for you, your life in small town Ohio hasn't really changed that much, right? There were no jobs pre-Trump. There are still no jobs. He did not make your life, he did not make it better, but he did not make your life worse.
He closed down our
standards. Huh?
He closed down one of our big factories this year, actually, which even made it, I was like, how did they close down a whole factory? And y'all still voted for this man.
I don't have logic, but that's the point that somebody raised to me yesterday. And I heard it and I was like, I can never agree with it. I will never understand it. But I'm not from
those areas.
I don't get it, but I could hear you trying to argue it with me. I'll never understand it, but I could hear you trying to make that argument to me.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I think this is kind of like what we were saying before about like a lot of his rhetoric. I think like, I don't think people understand like how deep like people's racism, sexism, xenophobia, whatever other ism and phobia you can think of, like that runs deep. And so I think for a lot of, you know, the white, not college educated folks, like they blame Black people for taking their jobs. They blame the city for taking their jobs. They blame the jobs for going overseas. Like that's the rhetoric that you keep hearing. You know, you think of big tech, the coastal elite, like not saying that's not a thing. I am a member of the coastal elite, I will say it. But like, but like that is the rhetoric that they hear, right? And so it's like, oh, I'm going to blame that for the reason I don't have a job. I'm going to blame that for the reason my factory closed. And so when Trump is saying all this stuff, they're like, that's easier. That's easier to admit than like the world is changing and, you know, robots are about to take over your factories. Like no one wants to say that, but they can say that Black people are taking your jobs or your jobs are going overseas, right? So I think that is what people are latching onto. And like that hate and that divide runs really, really deep. And so part of me wants to say like the education thing, but like part of me doesn't.
I don't even know like the education thing, right? Because I think you just hit the nail on the head when you said it runs deep. Honestly, I think that Trump sounds like people's grandpa, if you want me to be honest. You sound like he sounds like your granddaddy.
Right.
All right. And it's very common and very communal to use that language for the ilk of the same reason that I said earlier, which is this is not new language. Your Make America Great is rhetoric circa 1952.
Right. Yeah. And it's like your grandpa, right? Your grandpa was able to have a factory job and have 4 kids and buy a house. And like, so was mine. My grandpa wasn't, my grandpa was a construction worker. He worked in sanitation. And like, he had 3 kids and a house and a mortgage, right? Like that was a different time. Like it is, there are so many factors to that. And like, that is not what the Republican Party, not what Trump's talking about, but they're latching onto people's fear and they're latching onto people's hate. And that once you got that, once people are afraid, you can tell them anything. So I that's what I think it is. And I think, Neda, I too am not from small town USA, but that's what I think it is. It's like they've attached people's fear and people are afraid and people are scared and people are vulnerable. And Trump has been speaking to that for 4 years. Yeah. And he unearthed all these new, like, I don't know where that young guy is, like the 25-year-old.
He's not in Georgia. He's somewhere in the South. The one who's very, very, very young right-wing conservative. And he's like 25 and he sounds like a Klan member. Yes. It's crazy.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Like it's there and people are afraid.
And that's not an education thing, to your point. That's not an education thing. As going to a liberal elite school, it is not an education thing to use that rhetoric. That is not an education thing.
Damn, yo, honestly, I'm not even gonna lie to you. Like, I saw his picture on Instagram, hadn't read a caption or anything, but like, I have a soft spot for blue eyes, and I was like, oh, and then I read, and I was like, oh no, literally. I was like, I can't do it. And then, yeah.
It's not nasty to say that on this show. You are tired.
Immediately took all of the thoughts back. I was like, no. I'm good.
But that's somebody's local. We're talking about local election. He got elected, right? And Cory Bush got elected. Let's have a conversation about what the local populations are telling you and what we should be paying attention to.
You're not paying attention to the right things. I don't think anyone is paying attention to the right things.
Mm-mm.
No, I agree. And Neda and I were talking back and forth today, and we saw that there is the new Transition 46 website and Instagram and all this stuff. And I was reading it, and all I could really think to myself was full sentences and transparency and policy briefs. It was like my heart was going aflutter as like a whole nerd for this stuff. But like,
had real documents and not tweets.
No, it's like, that's the other thing. It's like, I want to be mad and like push us forward, but I also, tears were in my eyes when Biden said on Saturday, and we will trust science. I was like, oh my God. Facts. Like, thank God, right? So it's like, I get that, I do, and like, I'm celebrating that for sure, but it's also like, what, you know, I am excited now to actually talk politics with people and policy with people and not have to like argue for my basic human rights.
I think you can do both of those things. I'm sure you all have seen the tweet that's going around that can be like, you can be excited for not Trump and not be super obsessed with the Biden pick. You can be skeptical of Harris's old prosecutorial record and still be absolutely exuberant about the fact that a Black woman and a South Asian woman are going to the White House. You can be all of those. I think especially as a Black woman or a person of color, you can be all of those things in one breath.
Yes.
Yeah. I think what comes next really is 4 years of transparency and accountability, first and foremost, because like we've said many times today, it's Black and brown folks that made this happen, specifically Black women. And thus, if we are not going to be respected and if we are not going to be given the level of like importance that we deserve, then what was this for then? You know, what's the point of, I saw something that was saying like, because all I do in my life is paraphrase anyway, but it was something along the lines of like, it's not enough that we have Kamala Harris as the first like biracial female VP. It's that there shouldn't be a massive gap between her and the next one.
Yeah.
And I think that it's exactly that. It's that, you know, like you guys said too, we're not trying to return to the good old day. No. But what we are trying to do is make sure that like we go back to a place where everything was decent, and apparently that's what's gonna happen. But first, foremost, that we just like move forward, and that has to be like the fire throughout this entire presidency, even if it only is for just a term. You know, it needs to be that drive for transformation.
Neda, Sahara, what do you want to see? Because Mel just talked about what she's hoping to get out of the next 4 years. What do you guys want to see as we are entering this new presidency, whether that be the next 100 days, the next 4 years? What are you hoping? Sahara's excited to talk politics with people, but where are you hoping we go from here? Because I know you both have policy ideas, but also just personal investment in this.
Yeah, I mean, like, in the next 4 years, I think it is about like starting, like we went back, now we're kind of forward, and so we're like kind of starting fresh. And so like with this fresh start that we've been given, like how can we push things forward? I mean, like I feel like the things that are top of mind for me is like, I was reading this morning about like Biden's COVID plan. He already responded to, you know, like what Pfizer put out about the vaccine. And so like, I'm really excited to have a leader that can like get that under control, because I just think that is so important. I'm excited to see who he brings to help him formulate these policies. And like, I'm excited to be like talking about real policy and real change, whether it's climate change, whether it's healthcare, systemic racism, like the list goes on and on. Those are probably the biggest things for me. But just that, also like fun. Like my dad and I were talking about, I'm like a Hamilton fanatic, and how Lin-Manuel went to the White House, and like that's where he first sang Hamilton. Like, let's do some of that too. Like when Michelle Obama used to go on like Jimmy Fallon and we used to watch a sketch, like that too. Like I'm excited for that too, and just not everything to be so heavy all the time.
Yeah.
Something I'm excited about.
I need to see Maya Rudolph and Kamala Harris together on SNL.
Yeah. Yes. Ava DuVernay already said she's about to start screening movies and TV shows at the White House again. I said praise.
That's right.
That's what I want.
That's great. That's right.
They can't fix the garden. I want them to fix the rose garden.
Fix the garden. Fix the garden. I'm not a huge dog person, but I was clapping for the dog to come back. Dog. I'll take that. I'll take anything. Lord, help me.
When I went down to the White House to celebrate after the election, you know, I went down with a group of friends, and we were like popping champagne in front of the White House. And it's so funny because there's just like layers of walls. And like you have to go through all these fences and like navigate all these things, and there's just guards everywhere. And it was not like that 4 years ago. No. I mean, there's always like a fence around the White House, right? It's still the White House, but you could see it. It wasn't like the guard, like what it is now. It's different. The whole vibe is different. But I do love like just how much DC has embraced having parties in front of the White House recently. And the different songs they love to play in front of the White House.
Love that.
I already know the one.
The number one most streamed song in the world.
Facts. Yep, there we go. The one with Nipsey. Yeah.
Song in the world.
That's an example for that one. R.I.P. Because that was amazing.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Neds, do you have policy stuff you want to see, or you just are happy to be?
I took a whole list of notes. In addition to everything that Sahara has said, having just like this, I mean, just an open White House. You know, you want to feel I think we forget like our politicians serve us. Like Your government serves you. Like, we don't idolize these people. They work for us. So we want them to do work. In addition to, like, we want them to be good people because they are the global leaders and role models. People look up to them. They just do. But I'm excited to have that back, to have decency back. But as far as like actual next steps, I really do want a leader to address the COVID crisis. My brother's a doctor. My sister's a pharmacist. They've been isolated from us. It's impacted my family. It's impacted so many people I know. In addition to that, I think that also needs to include impacts on education, especially economic stimulus, student loans, things like that. I think we need to talk about the disproportionate impact on the Black and Hispanic community. We need to talk about why that disproportionate impact has happened, but we need to affirmatively tackle that, because that's going to happen again, if not with COVID, with something else. If this virus is disproportionately impacting those communities at such high levels, I think within the community, it was like for the Black community 3 times and for the Hispanic community 2 times, I think, were like or 4 times and 3, something like that. It was just these massive numbers, massive discrepancies. That's going to happen again. So that needs to be affirmatively tackled. I think also for me, just being an Arab American person, having the first time policy agenda, I would love to see them move forward and actually have some accountability on some of the promises that they made that won our community over. Because, you know, our community doesn't just stop at the campaign. We still exist in this country every day.
Exactly.
Right. For me, a big one is obviously repealing the Muslim and Africa bans, all four, like Muslim ban, Africa ban, 1.0 through 4.0, just erase, eliminate, period. Save none of it. Not even the title, which is, by the way, called the banning of foreign terrorists. We're going to not.
That's what it's actually called?
Yes.
Yes. And then collectively Muslim ban.
It makes me want to just like whack my head against the table violently and just.
I'll find you the full title. It's called it's like the elimination of the entry of foreign terrorists. Yeah, here it is. Protecting the nation from foreign terrorist entry. That's the exact title.
Yes, Jesus.
Eliminate all Muslim Africa ban.
Yeah,
And then for me too, being like obviously an immigration person, an asylum refugee person, we need to have just a whole discussion on the immigration system. Yeah. Within that, I have in my, the last 4 years have of course destroyed the refugee and asylum system. We need to reconfigure those. But long term, I think we need to really think about systematically considering removing USCIS from DHS and sort of dismantling some of the agencies within DHS that aren't working. Immigration is a civil and administrative court. It's not a crime to immigrate. It's never been a crime to immigrate. It doesn't go to criminal court, period. It has no place in a law enforcement agency. I think we also need to reconsider ICE and the uses for ICE. We need to talk about the threat that ICE has posed domestically and globally, as far as challenging the Fourth Amendment when it comes to protections of unreasonable searches and seizures, when you have right of entry issues at the border, the ways that they've intentionally separated children from their families, the ways that they've given unwanted hysterectomies to women, immigrant women, detainment. I think with that, we need to also talk about private contracts with private prisons and detention centers. We need to be alarmed that Core Civic and GEO Group have been making about $1.3 billion on ICE contracts since Trump has gone into office, and that in the last year, ICE has accounted for 30% of their revenue. Those are billion-dollar companies. We also, for me, a big one, lastly, is the environment and the climate crisis, reconsidering the Paris Agreement, and I think talking about some of the things in the Green New Deal, and especially when it comes to transportation in this country, building some sort of infrastructure that connects this massive land of the United States, and pushing forward on our country infrastructure. So for me, those are the big things.
A few small items. 2024.
No, that's perfect. And I think that in all honesty, we have had tons of banter on this program, but also we got really serious. All of us are very, very caring about what the next 4 years look like. We can all sit here and say that we are absolutely relieved and ecstatic to a certain extent to see the regime change. But we are also all quite aware that the movement that we are all engaged in did not end with the election of this vice president elect and this president. It started for us. It meant for all of us as grassroots organizers, policy people, NGO workers, and all the spaces that we occupy, we now have a new outlook and a renewed fervor to push for the things that we were promised in this campaign, to push for the things that we know our particular communities deserve, and for the things that we care about. This is a monumental moment, not just for the United States, but for the globe, because like I said last episode, we're no longer standing up for racism. We're standing up to racism. We're standing up to fascism, sexism. We're saying that science is real, and we're doing all the things that we need to do to push this world forward. The people that are engaged in this movement across the globe, we have time. We have time. We are doing our activism in a myriad of different ways, and we are not going to just come at you from one angle. We will be in the streets, but also in your boardroom, so do not forget it. I want to thank Neda and Sahara so much for coming on the program. You are always welcome, and we always want to have you back. If you're missing what we think on some of these policy issues, go back. We talk about these things in previous episodes. Have a blast. But I hope everybody is taking a deep breath, but because this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint, get your rest and get ready to fight, because January 20th, we are still coming with full fire. And as always, thank you so much for coming to Got Melanin.
Everybody gather round and listen to me.